Once rotation hits, we're also going to be getting a bunch of new cards from the Journey Together set. Those cards have been out in Japan for a couple of weeks now, and based on the current tournament results, it looks like Lillie's Clefairy is the best Pokemon of the bunch. I'm Jet from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about Lillie's Clefairy EX post-rotation. Lillie's Clefairy EX is a squishy multi-prize Pokemon with only 190 HP. We normally see multi-prize attacking Pokemon with at least 210, usually 200 to 230 HP, so 190 is pretty low. However, it does have some big benefits to it. For one, its Full Moon Rondo attack is very efficient for only one Psychic, and a colorless does 20 damage and then 20 more damage for each bench Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. We have seen this style of attack in recent years with Palkia V-Star having it, Entei V, Raikou V, and Suicune V as well, going back a little further, and we know this is a good attack. With the benches both full at 5, this is swinging for 220 damage, but because we have Area 0 Underdepths in the format, where both benches can go up to 8 if there's a Tera Pokemon in play, this can swing for even more, making it a very dangerous attacker, especially when Area 0 Underdepths is in play. Now, not every Clefairy deck runs Area 0 Underdepths, but it's definitely a way to make it even more powerful. The other big benefit to Lillie's Clefairy EX is that it has the Fairy Zone ability, where the weakness of each of your opponent's Dragon Pokemon is now Psychic. And that means that Lillie's Clefairy EX or any other Psychic attackers you have in the game are going to be taking down some of the biggest threats much more easily. Dragapult EX and Raging Bolt EX are two of the best decks post-rotation, and Lillie's Clefairy can clear them fairly easily. On top of all of that, Clefairy has access to Lillie's Pearl, where if Clefairy has this attached to it, it drops one fewer prize card. So not only do you have a Pokemon that has multi-prize level HP and can one-hit KO multi-prize Pokemon, it also only drops a single prize in return when it is equipped with Lillie's Pearl. Again, not every Clefairy deck runs Lillie's Pearl, but there are a number that do, and it's an amazing tech for those that can squeeze it in. Here's a look at the metagame in Japan, and you probably noticed my hair looks a little different. I'm wearing a slightly different outfit. Full disclosure, between the time I recorded this and now, the metagame did shift a little bit, so I'm going to re-record this little part of it. And the reason I'm re-recording it is because Clefairy actually jumped up the chart. It was already an S tier deck at the second place spot between Dragapult and Raging Bolt, but it is now in the #1 spot in the meta. And this is the Pokébook's top tier list based on top 16 decks in Japan City League tournaments in the last week. So from February 24th to March 3rd, the deck that got top 16 the most was Clefairy EX. Clefairy is super hot right now. And yes, it's somewhat skewed in terms of how many top 16s it has, because it's also a one-of card that's teched into a number of different decks. But the deck where Clefairy is primarily played is like absolutely taking over the game right now. If you count all of the decks where Clefairy is in there, so including the ones where it's teched in, it makes 936 appearances in top 16, which is a lot relative to the rest of the competition. And again, I don't think this Clefairy listing on the on Pokébook counts the decks where Clefairy is just teched in. That is just Clefairy in and up, like the Clefairy / Noctowl box decks that we'll get into in a sec. But right now, the Clefairy deck, incredibly strong. We're going to start things off with a Clefairy focused deck. Now, I do have to preface this by saying that this is not the most popular way to play Clefairy. I think any decks that have Clefairy oftentimes are more of a box style that have a number of different attackers, but we're going to keep things simple by starting with a Clefairy focused deck. And this one here is very much focused around Clefairy as the primary attacker of the deck, and everything else is in support of Clefairy attacking. Helping to get energy on the board as well as draw cards is Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. Teal Dance lets you attach a grass energy from your hand to a Teal Mask Ogerpon and then draw a card. And then on top of that, we are running a bunch of energy switch cards where you can move that energy from the Ogerpon over to the Clefairy, so you could be attacking as early as turn 1 going second. And if your opponent has a wide bench start and you start wide, you could be swinging for upwards of 220 damage on the first turn, and that's pretty ridiculous. Since we are playing with Teal Mask Ogerpon, that opens the door for Noctowl to be in use, where its Jewel Seeker ability allows you to grab 2 trainer cards of your choice when you evolve into Noctowl. So really great draw engine here to cherry pick those pieces that we need to start attacking. And when we have Noctowl, Fan Rotom is not far behind. Its Fan Call ability allows you to grab 3 colorless Pokemon with 100 HP or less and put them into your hand, but only on the first turn of the game, which is fine. You can get a nice grip of Hoot Hoots and Noctowls for the following turn. And then on top of that, it's not a bad attacker as well. Assault Landing for 1 colorless energy does 70 damage, and if there's no Stadium in play, this attack does nothing. So you could be attacking for 70 damage, taking out stuff like Dreepies and Charmanders as soon as the game starts. Prime Catcher is the ace-spec of choice here, where your opponent's bench Pokemon gets moved into the active, and then your bench Pokemon gets moved into the active. There are a number of ace-specs that work for Clefairy, and this one uses Prime Catcher. Can't hate on that, especially where your damage may vary from turn to turn based on bench size, and there could be times where you need to pick off a smaller multi-prize Pokemon in order to get the KO and stay on tempo. So Prime Catcher, an amazing card in general, and a nice fit for Clefairy in the context of this specific build. We kind of already established that Area 0 Underdepths and Lillie's Pearl are big tools, or like big cards in the deck. This one has 3 copies of Area 0 Underdepths, very much leaning on opening the bench up really wide, and then a couple of copies of Lillie's Pearl to make sure that our Clefairies are dropping fewer prizes. This second take on Clefairy Ogerpon actually has a slightly thicker line of Clefairies going with a full set of 4. Also see that they've got a 3rd Lillie's Pearl as well. I would try and squeeze in as many Lillie's Pearls as I could into my personal build. Another big difference here is that we include Badoo in the deck, where its Itchy Pollen attack for 0 energy does 10 damage, and it item locks our opponent on the following turn, giving us potentially more time to set up. Another sneaky tech is Volcanion EX, where once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in your active spot, you can make your opponent's active Pokemon burned, where at the end of that turn, your opponent's going to take 20 burn damage, and then they have to flip a coin to see if they are still burned on the following turn. So being able to squeeze out a bit of extra damage is very nice, especially since Clefairy's damage can vary from turn to turn. So getting to squeeze out a little extra damage with some burn is pretty cool. The most popular way to play Lillie's Clefairy by a landslide is in a deck like this, which is the Noctowl Tera Box, and that's the name that Limitless gave this sort of concept. And we still have the Ogerpons and the Noctowls as our draw engine and energy acceleration, but we are minimizing the Clefairies to make room for other types of attackers. Helping us power up these other attackers is Sparkling Crystal, where Terra Pokemon need 1 less energy in order to attack. This is our ace-spec in the deck. We also have Crispin in the deck, where when you play Crispin, you can take 2 energies of different types from your deck, put one of them into your hand, and attach the other one to a Pokemon in play. So this is going to make it a lot easier to attack with some of the other Pokemon that you have besides Clefairy. By minimizing the Clefairy count, that opens the door for cards like Wellspring Mask Ogerpon to be in the mix. We are primarily using it for that torrential pump attack, where for a water and 2 colorless, you're doing 100 damage to the active, and you can shuffle that energy back into the deck and then do an additional 120 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So really nice snipe damage here, and in particular, in post-rotation play, we're not really seeing any sort of bench protection. Manaphy is rotating out, and not many decks are teching in the Rabsca at this point in time because it's a little slower to set up. So a lot of decks are just leaving themselves wide open, which makes Wellspring Mask Ogerpon even more dangerous. Pikachu can be an incredibly strong attacker and a little bit of a defensive menace as well. Topaz Bolt for a grass, lightning, and a metal energy does 300 damage, but you have to discard all of that energy from this Pokemon, which is unfortunate, but 300 is a massive number, being able to take out pretty much every big stage 1 EX all the way up to Archaludon in one hit. And then its Resolute Heart ability can be very annoying for your opponent to deal with, where if it has full HP and it would be one hit KO'd by an attack, you actually stay alive and still have 10 HP remaining. Last but not least, we have Blood Moon Ursaluna EX. Its Season Skill ability allows it to reduce its attack cost by 1 for each prize card your opponent has taken, meaning that this Blood Moon attack is very easy to power up towards the end of the game, swinging for a solid 240 damage. Another take on the Noctowl Tera Box also comes from that same 5,000 player tournament, courtesy of Tord Reklev, who finished 11th. This one looks very similar to the last one, but the biggest difference I saw off the top was Terapagos EX, which has 2 strong attacks. The first one is Unified Beatdown. Though you can't use it turn 1 going second, it still, for 2 colorless energy, allows you to do 30 damage for each of your bench Pokemon. When you've got Area 0 Underdepths in play, you are swinging for 240 damage, which is a really strong number, taking out all of the big basics in the game. And something that Terapagos EX currently doesn't do pre-rotation, because we're always playing it with double turbo energy. On top of that, we have the Crown Opal attack, which we don't really see right now in pre-rotation times because we're only playing with double turbo energy, but because we have grass, water, and lightning in the deck, we can use Crown Opal for 180 damage and prevent attacks from basic non-colorless Pokemon. So really cool tech attacker here that can wall off certain decks. All of the builds we've looked at up to this point have used Teal Mask Ogerpon and Energy Switch for energy acceleration, but it doesn't have to be that way. This build that got 7th place uses the Xatu engine, where Xatu allows you to attach a psychic energy from your hand and then put it to one of your Pokemon on the bench and then draw 2 cards. So a little bit of energy acceleration and draw power tied to this Xatu. Heavy count of Tatsugiri here, where when we've got this card in the active, we can look at the top 6 cards of our deck and grab a supporter card we find there and put it into our hand, giving us a bit more consistency that we wouldn't have otherwise. Combine this with the rescue board that's also in this deck, and we can use this at the start of our turn after KOs to grab some great support pieces. Unlike the other builds we've seen so far, this one leans a little more defensively with the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX. Its Cornerstone stance ability prevents it from getting hit from Pokemon that have an ability on them, so a Charizard EX can't normally swing through Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon, which is nice, and we have the energy to use its Demolish attack as well, so not only can we wall off opposing attacks from Pokemon with abilities, but we can swing for 140 damage and then hit through walling Pokemon like another Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon or a Mimikyu. This player chose to go with a thick Rabska line, protecting the bench from damage and effects of attacks. So not only can you block snipe damage from Wellspring Mask Ogerpon, you can also block Dragapult's Phantom Dive's damage counters to the bench as well. The trade-off here from a mana fee is that it's a stage 1, so you have to set it up. It's going to take at least a turn, and then your opponent could also just snipe out the Rellor before you fully get set up. So there's some pros and cons, but because this deck has a lot of smaller Pokemon to set up, including the Natus, this player thought it was important to have the Rabska in there. Hero's Cape is the ace spec of choice here, making our Clefairy, or any other attacker for that matter, more tanky, giving them a plus 100 HP boost. The second take on a Clefairy Xatu deck gets even more walling Pokemon, where we lean into that walling strategy with the Milotic EX, where its Sparkling Scales ability prevents it from taking damage from and effects of attacks from your opponent's Terra Pokemon done to this Pokemon. So not only does this block attacks from something like Terra Charizard EX or Dragapult EX's Phantom Dive, it also blocks the damage counters from Phantom Dive that are trying to hit it while Milotic is on the bench. So really powerful wall that's going to block a lot of meta-relevant attackers. We also have a sniper option here in Wellspring Mask Ogerpon, where Torrential Pump can do 100 to the active, and then you shuffle the energy in and can do 120 to the bench as well. Should also note that Sob can be an okay attack as well, where you're doing 20 damage and you prevent your opponent from retreating to the bench. Legacy Energy is the A-spec of choice here, which is actually kind of a crazy combo, because if you've got Lillie's Clefairy and the Pearl in play, Legacy Energy is -1 prize when you get KO'd, and Lillie's Pearl is -1 prize. So you now have a Lillie's Clefairy that could potentially drop 0 prizes when it gets knocked out. For a Pokemon that has the potential to one-hit KO multi-prize Pokemon while also not dropping any prizes in return, that's amazing. Pretty much every Gardevoir deck going forward is going to tech in at least one copy of Clefairy EX. It's really easy to power up with Gardevoir EX thanks to that Psychic Embrace ability. And then on top of that, the damage you are causing to the Clefairy, you can just Monkey Dory off as well, so that you are then doing additional damage on top of what Clefairy would be swinging for in the first place. Not going to go too deep into Gardevoir. I have a separate video on Gardevoir that goes through all the different options. I just wanted to show that you can tech a Clefairy into the Gardevoir decks post-rotation. Flareon is gaining a bit of heat in Japan, and this is a deck that can also tech in a Lillie's Clefairy, though we do have 2 copies here, so it's a little thicker on the Clefairy count, but there are a number of different attackers here as well. Flareon is the literal fire starter of this deck, where its Burning Charge attack for a fire and a colorless energy does 130 damage, and you get to search your deck for 2 basic energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. So this is going to be a way of powering up your other options, whatever they may be, and it might even just be another Flareon. Helping you power up the assortment of attackers in this deck is Crispin, where you can grab 2 energy cards from your deck, put one of them into your hand, and the other one attached to a Pokemon in play. Sylveon EX is a potential tech attacker in this deck. Magical Charm for a Psychic and 2 colorless does 160 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, attacks used by the defending Pokemon do 100 less damage, so giving you a little bit of defensive tank. And then on top of that, way more intriguing here, Angelite for a Water, a Lightning, and Psychic lets you choose 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon and just shuffle them and all attached cards back into your opponent's deck. You're not necessarily taking KOs, but if you can take out 2 key Pokemon from your opponent's bench, that could potentially end the game for you right there. So really cool attack, very weird attack, but if Flareon can help you get that energy on Sylveon, and then Sylveon can wipe your opponent's board essentially, you could win in very cool fashion. Farigiraf EX has the ability Armor Tail, where you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon, giving you a walling option against certain decks like a Raging Bolt, for example, and you can attack with this as well. Dirty Beam for a Psychic and 2 colorless does 160 damage, and it does 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. We've talked about Wellspring Mask Ogerpon a bunch. It has the Snipe attack. Let's keep going. One of the most recent releases in Japan is actually a deck featuring Metagross, and it's Steven's Metagross to be particular, and it does pair very well with Clefairy EX. Steven's Metagross is a Stage 2 Metal Pokemon that is thick. 340 HP is the highest HP we've seen on a Pokemon under normal circumstances, and its Metal Stomp attack it's okay. A Metal and 2 colorless for 200 damage is fine, but you're not necessarily taking big one-hit KOs on many of the meta-relevant attackers in the game. But its EX Boot attack, or X Boot, lets you accelerate a basic Psychic energy card and a basic Metal energy card and attach them to your Psychic or Metal Pokemon in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. And this is once during your turn, so this can be a great way of powering up that Clefairy in one go. Steven's Metagross may be a bit slow to set up, which is why we have Teal Mask Ogerpon in the deck as well. Thinner counts, we've only got 2 instead of the 3 or 4 that we normally see in a Clefairy deck, but Teal Dance is still great here, allowing you to attach an energy, a grass energy specifically, from your hand to the Ogerpon, and then you can energy switch it over to the Clefairy so that the Clefairy can ramp up and attack faster. This build runs a thick count of Lillie's Pearl, so that Clefairy is dropping one less prize. And dropping one less prize on top of having a backup attacker in Metagross that has 340 HP can make this a really annoying deck to deal with. Slowking is a relatively new deck concept, and this deck doesn't really rely on Clefairy. Clefairy is here as a tech attacker, and I haven't done a video on this concept yet, so we'll talk about this at a high level, and if there's enough results, maybe we will get around to covering this deck in more detail. We will still cover it at a high level though. Slowking has the attack Seek Inspiration, where for a Psychic and a Colorless, you discard the top card of your deck, and if that card is a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, choose one of its attacks and use it as this attack. And there are some really cool Pokemon that this attack can copy. One of the attacks we can copy is Kyurem. Yes, initially a lot of people thought this card was going to die due to rotation and Regidrago going away, but Kyurem still has a home in the Slowking deck, where Slowking can copy Trifrost and do 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. And this is especially dangerous in a format where Manaphy's not here and most decks aren't running Rapska. You could completely board wipe your opponent if they're playing an evolution deck with this one attack. We could also copy Conkeldurr's Gutsy Swing attack, where for a fighting and 3 colorless, this normally would be a very expensive attack for 250 damage, but we can just copy it with Slowking for only 2 energy and still swing for 250. This deck also techs in Regigigas from Prismatic Evolutions, where its Jewel Breaker attack does 100 damage plus 230 more damage if the opponent's active Pokemon is a Terra Pokemon. So we are one-hit KOing Charizards and Dragapults everywhere. Gholdengo EX is a deck that can tech in Clefairy EX, though it's not necessarily ideal. Not going to go into detail on like how Gholdengo works, going to assume that you know how to do that, but Clefairy can ramp up pretty quickly here because Gholdengo can potentially tank a hit and you just attach an energy manually to the Clefairy, and then on that second turn Clefairy can come in and swing. Or this deck also has a copy of Crispin, which you can use to build up Clefairy in one go. All of the variations of Dragapult can pretty easily run a Clefairy EX because Dragapult is a deck that oftentimes runs Crispin as well as Psychic Energy, so building up a Clefairy out of nowhere is pretty reasonable. I've got Dragapult Iron Thorns here just because that's the one that I found first, but a number of Dragapult combinations and variations, whether it's Dusknoir or Xatu or whatever other variations of Dragapult there are out there, oftentimes will tech in a single copy of Clefairy to blow up other Dragapults and Raging Bolts for that matter, and just to be a big attacker at any point in the match, really. Even this pretty crammed Charizard list that got 3rd place has room for a Clefairy EX. This squeezes in all the techs, including the Noctowl line, a Dusknoir line, the Terapagos, and a Pidgeot line, and still has a Clefairy in here as a tech attacker, primarily against those dragon decks. And there's a couple of ways you can build up Clefairy in this. You can either use Crispin to build it up in one go, or even just Charizard's Energy Acceleration, where you're accelerating 3 fire energy when you evolve into Charizard. You attach 2 to your Charizard and then throw the 3rd one onto the Clefairy on the bench, so you've got it ready for a future turn. There we go. That is a look at Clefairy EX in the upcoming post-rotation format. As its own deck, it doesn't seem like that's the way to go with Clefairy, but as part of a tech include in other existing decks, or this Noctowl box where it's one of many different attackers, Clefairy is doing really well. It does seem like in a more boxed deck that's the way you want to play this card, but it seems like Clefairy in and of itself is just really strong regardless of how you play it. Are you excited for Clefairy EX? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.